It's 1:30. We will call the Cumberland County Finance meeting to order. And we will begin with the roll call. Please, Laura.
Yes. Commissioner Nieder.
I'm here.
Commissioner Fasci.
I'm here.
Commissioner Eichelberger.
Right. We will open this up to public comment. Is there any public comment to come before the Board of Commissioners at this time? Lauren, is anyone showing online? If you're online and would like to make public comment, please do so. Use the raise your hand feature. It's not here. There is anyone. Anyone in the room? Nope. Okay. We will begin then with the approval of the minutes from the October 16th meeting.
I'll move to approve.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Next up, again, the fun part of the job. We have a little bit of recognition here for 20 years of service in the MHIDD area. So Mark, if you would like to come up and
Sure.
Jamie will, this is good stuff.
You're
The middle.
Hi. So would you like to say a few words about Jamie?
I sure will. We are really, really lucky to have Jamie. 20 years. Jamie is integral to really the processes of us getting services and supports out to families. She handles enrollment into all our waivers for all our folks. But one of the biggest things that Jamie does and is just a huge help is she does a lot of work with our complex cases for children. She's our go-to person in the office that really helps us have those kiddos have a successful transition to adulthood. So we are very lucky to have Jamie.
And we're lucky to have her for 20 years.
Yeah.
So thank you for your dedication and commitment to the county and to the people that you serve on behalf. I know Jean's been very involved in complex cases and your job isn't getting any easier. So we very much appreciate you hanging in there and for all of the time and effort you make for those kiddos, especially.
Here's to the next 20 years.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Are we good?
Yeah, we can do it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I know, I was holding my breath.
I'll try and get you something. That's good.
Next up, I think we have the finance team here to make a presentation, the financial analysis committee presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So welcome to the November 6th Financial Analysis Committee presentation. Today's presentation will be from the focal point of the county's general. The first topic we're going to cover today is an update on where we expect to end 2024. So there has been some shifts in our numbers. Overall, our revenues are not keeping up pace with our expenses as we presented to you back over the summertime. And we anticipate plugging that gap with our fund balance management. Then we will give you an update on the 2025 budget. We will give you a comparison of our 25 budget next to our 2025 projections and talk about what the differences are between budget and projections. We'll take a look at our 5-year projections, which cover 2024 through 2028. And then we'll take a look at some options to address our shortfall of revenue for 2025 that we anticipate having. And then in addition to today's presentation, Carrie, Brandon, and our finance team have prepared a appendix document from you. You should have a copy of that. So that just covers some things that we're not able to cover in the time frame of today's presentation. So it gives you some more in-depth look at what the budget process is, about our real estate revenues, about our one-time monies, and then some analysis on our revenues and expenses. Okay. As I mentioned, our first comparison is looking at where we expect to end 2024. So the first column you have there is our projections for 24 from back in May. The second column is our current projections based on August. If you take a look at the bottom line, the projected unassigned fund balance, there's very little change to the bottom line at this point. However, if you take a look at additional impact section, which is the third section in number 3, the fund balance management, you can see we were anticipating using $1.8 million of fund balance management back in May. That is now down to $1.3 million as of today. So in the next slide, we'll get into why that's occurring. Okay. On the revenue side, revenues have increased $4,194,000 or 4%. So the first item is interest revenue is up about $780,000. We are holding on to our county grant program dollars longer than we anticipated. Also, interest rates are holding steady. We had anticipated some decline. Now we are expecting a rate cut at some point this week, and then probably follow-up rate cuts over the next year. Then the next item, proceeds from long-term debt are increasing $3 million. And this is the accounting related to Subita's subscription-based IT arrangements and right-to-use leases. Now, this is a revenue increase. There is also offsetting expense increase that we will see in the capital section.
Ron, those, and not to jump ahead, but those, that accounting treatment really wreaks a little bit of havoc with the numbers.
It makes it confusing.
I appreciate the clarity that you've given to it in the presentation. Thank you.
On the expense side, projected expenses are increasing 2.7 million or 2.4%. Operating expenses, departments continue to hold the line on spending and operating. We are seeing increases in contracts. We're seeing increases in cost of goods and services. Our departments are doing an excellent job holding the line on total operating expenses. On the subsidy side, so subsidy is increasing $1,076,000 or 7.22%. Children and youth, as of the end of fiscal year 23-24, is in an overmatch situation. So that overmatch is about $1.2 million. So that is showing in this $1.9 million worth of subsidy.
And so, Ron, can I just get some clarification around that? So overmatch is additional expense costs that we've paid. This would have been prior to the new salaries that have been added.
So we've overspent our needs-based budget.
Right.
Now, historically, the state does come back and make us whole in those overmatch situations. As of today, we do not have a commitment from the state that they are going to pay that overmatch.
When have they never made it whole? If that's not a double negative.
I'm not aware of a situation they haven't made it whole. Sometimes it takes a long time to make us whole.
Okay.
But at least from my knowledge, there hasn't been a situation where we haven't recouped.
Remind me how long that period of time is. You said it takes them a while.
We would anticipate in probably the first 6 months of 2025.
So less than a year.
Yeah, less than a year.
But to the point of, again, for some folks that are watching, that hits the point of why we need to have reserves, because this is an instance where we've essentially spent $1.2 million on services. And that doesn't come, while it's a large number, it really shouldn't be alarming at all to this board from the standpoint that every contract that we have seen come before us prior to my arrival here, and definitely since January, since I've been here, has come in at significantly higher costs, anywhere in the range at the very unbelievably low end on only occasional items of about 4% to as high as over 100% in increases. So while it's not a anything that we can control as much as we would like. I appreciate knowing where, where these costs are coming from. So thank you.
And another item that's driving this increase in subsidy, and also the children's need-based budget is congregate care. So, those contracts currently are about $1,000 a day per youth. So, and we have 4 youth currently in congregate care, so that gets very expensive very quickly.
Right. And they're generally not in there for a day.
Correct.
They're in there for more prolonged time period than once.
And I would just add to that is our obligation as a provider of children and youth services within the county. I see Dana nodding her head. We can't just say, we're not spending $1,000 a day. We have to take care of this children.
Thank you.
An offset to subsidy increase is 911 subsidy is decreasing $1,084,000, and that's temporary. It is because of capital projects that either didn't get started or will not get finished in 24 that are simply shifting to 2025. Capital is increasing 750,000 or 7.5%. So what's increasing is the expense side of the subscription-based IT arrangements and the right to use leases. And then offsetting that increase is about $2.1 million in capital projects that have been delayed for the county. And those projects are simply shifting down the road to 25. Transfers in debt is increasing 700,000 or 17.5%. Now our debt service is not changing at all. So there's no change in our debt service. What's driving that increase is the payments for the submittals. So those payments now fall under, with the accounting change, they fall under transfers of debt. The additional.
Excuse me, I'm sorry,
Yep.
and the debt you said is not increasing, but this debt, it includes the additional bond that was just financed.
So that is coming back to the county as subsidy to the 911 fund. So the debt payments is being paid by 911.
Right.
911 doesn't have enough.
Not this debt category.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So additional impacts is decreasing 1.3 million or 17.7%. With the capital projects deferring to 2025, a good portion of those projects are funded with the county grant program. So that county grant program is decreasing because those projects are not getting done this year. So kind of the culmination of all of these changes is the $500,000 change in the fund balance management.
But that's positive. So
It's a good change.
it's a good change. So
Now understand our projections are a range, they could go backwards, they could continue to improve. So this is our fund balance thermometer. So the red zone on our fund balance thermometer, to meet the cash flow needs of the general fund in the first quarter of a calendar year, it's about $22.7 million. And that's about 70 days of fund balance. Now, to meet the cash flow needs of the county's general fund, plus the funds that impact the general fund, it takes 100 days of fund balance. Now, GFOA's recommendation on fund balance is 90 days. 90 days would not cover our first quarter worth of cash flow needs. That's why we use 100 days.
Has that always been the case? Because we've always used the 100 days.
100 days is in our,
GFOA is still 90?
as far as I know.
Can I interrupt? So the recommendation by the GFOA is the minimum is 90 days, but you're supposed to look at your circumstance.
Right.
When we look at our circumstance, it's about 100 days. Sorry.
So we're anticipating ending 2024 with 32.5 million, which is right at the 100-day mark. And that's using $1.3 million of fund balance management to plug the gap between our revenues and our expenses.
So Ron, and I know we've talked about this before, the original budget, when I came to the board prior to adjusting millage, we were anticipating using $14 million of fund balance management in that. And it was a component of the $20 million shortfall in that budget.
So I do want to point that out because there have been some folks that have said no work has been done here. And I think that is patently false when you look at what that budget was and to where we are now. So thank you.
So now I'm gonna hand it over to Carrie. She's gonna talk about the 25 budget. She's gonna give you a look at the 25 budget and versus 25 projections. And she's gonna show you the 24 through 28 projections.
So this slide's going to show you the updated 2025 general fund budget numbers. So these have been updated since you saw them in the presentation in August. Revenue has increased 2.6 million, and that's due to our final analysis of real estate tax revenue for next year and the completion of our second review of departmental budgets. Expenses have increased about 3.3 million, and that's due to adding budget for the agency reviews. And we also finalized our indirect cost plan for next year. So when we added those amounts in, subsidy increased for 911. The additional impacts increased about 2 million, and that is mostly due to the transfer for those agency radios. So after these changes, that brought our total general fund revenue to 106.4 million and total expense to 132.3 million. That makes our budgeted difference 25.8 million. But when you add in the 15.8 and additional impacts, the budgeted difference is about 10 million. So then this next section, I'm going to go into comparing our 2025 budget to 2025 projections. And we do expect to see differences between our budget and projections. So the next several slides will go into detail explaining some of those differences. So for our revenue budget and projections, we have no major changes at this point between the two, and we expect that at this point in the year. So as 2025 progresses, we expect to see changes between budget and projections, and that's due to additional grant opportunities that may become available throughout the year or changes in our projected trends. So then moving into our salary and benefits, we expect to have differences between our budget and projections. So for budget, we budget for all positions and we adjust hours as needed for vacant positions, depending on when a department plans to fill positions. With projections, we do not project based on the position, but more looking at salaries as a whole. So this allows us to capture turnover and new positions in our projections, whereas budget captures all the approved positions because we don't know what departments will have the turnover or add or remove positions. Another difference is that budget has a 3% wage scale adjustment and a 2.5% step increase for non-union positions. And then our projections are based on changes approved by the board and historically what adjustments have been made. It's also important to note that departments can't move budget from their salary and benefit lines without finance approval. So then for operating expenses, the difference between budget and projections is the contingency and the additional budget needed in budget lines for the processing factor and for Lawson. So departments can't spend more than their approved budget. So we always have a little bit extra in there for processing issues in Lawson. And then contingency is also controlled by finance, and departments can't move money from contingency without finance. So then some of the major changes between our subsidy budget and projections is children and youth is projected higher than budget. And that's again due to the expansion of their needs-based budget and more complex cases. And MHIDD is projected less than budget, and that's due to changes in provided services. Both of these funds operate on a fiscal basis and subsidy is on a calendar basis. So this is also part of the difference between the two. Our 911 subsidy projection is less than budget, and that's due to removing the mobile backup unit from our projections because this will potentially be grant funded, so it'll have no effect on our unassigned fund balance. So the major changes between our capital budget and projections is again due to that in-for processing factor and timing of projects. Farmland preservation is projected less than budget because the county pays the full cost of those invoices, and then we are reimbursed by the townships later. So again, this is that processing factor in Lawson. So the full cost needs budgeted in order to process the payment because we get the reimbursement at a later time. The other change is just timing of projects. Historically, there's always projects that are budgeted for, but are either delayed or don't get completed in that budget year. Our transfers in debt are projected less than budget, and that's due to 5.3 million in our transfer to the external county grant program. We don't include this in our projections because this also has no impact to our unassigned fund balance. So then our additional impacts in budget are different than projections, and this is due to timing of the county grant program projects, the transfer for the external county grant program, and other budgeted expenses that have other funding sources that are not included in revenue budgets. And the chart at the bottom of this slide kind of shows you the pieces that go into the additional impacts and what the differences are between budget and projections. So now we're going to move into our 5-year projections, and there have been no major shifts in the out years since you saw projections in July. The current projections assume no millage changes, no changes in our expenses or revenues, and we're using all of our fund balance management by 2026. Our current projections show our unassigned fund balance at the minimum 100 days in 24 and 25. Without any changes in 2025, a change is needed in 2026 for the projected $10 million difference between revenue and expenses. So again, the next several slides are going to go into detail of assumptions we use when developing our projections. The first section on each slide just restates what the major changes are from the May projections. And since Ron discussed those earlier, I'm going to focus on the out years. So for real estate taxes, we have an average annual increase of 1.5%. We have interest is projected to decrease due to the estimated decrease in interest rates and our cash balance due to spending of that county grant program funding. And there are also several grants in 24 and 25 that we expect to end by the end of 25. So this is causing revenue to fluctuate between 24 and 25, but you'll also see that same trend in expenses on a later slide. So our salary and benefit projections assume there's no wage scale adjustments in 2024. And salary expenses have an average annual increase of 4%. And this includes wage scale adjustments, step increases, turnover, and adding or removing positions. And then our benefits are based on salary increases and changes to medical, dental, and vision contracts.
And Carrie, not to state the obvious, but your projections and that you're using, your assumptions, that's based on a historic look back as to what we've experienced generally as a county and kind of estimating what you're feeling.
Where are we thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then for our operating expenses, you can see the expenses fluctuating between 24 and 26. And this is mostly due to that grant funding I talked about earlier. So all of the expenses have offsetting revenue. So our subsidy projections have an average annual increase of 2.5%, and they assume flat city funding. In 2025, the 911 bond payments begin for the second bond issue, and then MHIDD is projected to decrease due to changes in provided services. Our capital projections are developed using departmental 10-year plans. Historically, capital is about 3 to 4 million each year, but we did anticipate 24 through 2026 to be higher capital years. And this is because a lot of projects were delayed due to COVID and difficulty finding vendors to do the work, or when we did find a vendor, they were delayed getting the project started. And we also had more projects scheduled during this time.
So Carrie, in both, it looks like then in both 25 and 26,
there's an additional roughly $3 million in capital that has historically not been
Correct.
in there.
For our transfers and debt projections, debt changes follow our amortization schedules. And like I said, on the subsidy slide, 911 bonds are shown in subsidy rather than in the transfers and debt. And that's because the 911 fund will pay the debt service and then request general fund subsidy. The increase in 2026 is due to the M4 project. This project is charged to a capital fund, and then the general fund will transfer the funding to this fund. And part of that is covered by the county grant program. Our additional impacts section currently shows other funding that offsets expenses. The county grant program funding will shift depending on project spend, and fund balance management can shift depending on changes in expenses and revenues. Currently, our fund balance management is allocated in 2024 and 25 to maintain the minimum 100 days of fund balance, and the remaining amount is used in 2026. So then this slide shows you the unassigned fund balance. And as you can see, fund balance will continue to decline without changes in revenues and expenses. And the one-time money is temporarily keeping our unassigned fund balance at the minimum 100 days. So on the previous slide, you saw the unassigned fund balance using fund balance management. This slide is showing you the unassigned fund balance with the fund balance management removed. So that one-time money, with the one-time money removed, we're not even at 100 days of fund balance in 2024. So using that one-time money is masking the decrease in our fund balance, and revenues are not keeping pace with expenses.
And while I can appreciate that, this fund balance management, which is what we're affectionately calling the ARPA funding that the county received, correct? That's been brought in for our cash flow purposes.
So the ARPA funding, we met the requirements of the ARPA funding. We have additional other funding that
Was
was
replaced.
generated because of using ARPA funding to cover general fund salary benefits.
So we were able to accrue these one-time monies because of the ARPA funding that was received
Absolutely.
back at that time period. So which to me indicates that the program of the ARPA funding did what it was intended to do, which was to subsidize those programs and funding when it was needed. And okay, thank you.
So then this slide is a visual representation of that unassigned fund balance. The bars represent our current projections using the fund balance management, and then the line is showing projections without the fund balance management. So this chart is showing you how that one-time money is smoothing the decrease in fund balance, and that it would have been much more drastic without that one-time money. So now Ron is going to go through a few options for 2025 to maintain 100 days of fund balance.
All right, so now we'll talk about several options that we use a combination of millage changes coupled with use of fund balance management to navigate 2025 and the out years. And our options are philosophical thing, three different philosophies on how you use millage increases to move through the out years. So the first one would be incremental changes annually. Number two would be a large increase on the front end and then not making changes for several years. The third would be to use your fund balance management and delay any millage change as long as possible. So all three of these options will use $1.3 million of fund balance management to cover the gap between revenues and expenses in 2024. And then these are examples. We can show you different variations of these examples. We'll pull up our interactive spreadsheet after we go through the three examples. So option one is incremental changes over time. So under this option, we would increase millage by 7%, use 500,000 of fund balance management for 2025. This is an increase to the taxpayer of $39.29 for 2025 on a home that's assessed at $222,000. So now the chart that comes in, you can see for 2025, where we would increase millage 7%, use $500,000 of fund balance management. That keeps us at 100 days. Then it would require another 6% millage change for 2026 with an additional $3.8 million of fund balance management. And then 27 would be another 4% millage change. And then in 28, you could use additional fund balance management to maintain 100 days. So the pros and cons of this scenario: pros, it's a modest annual increase to the taxpayer. So it does give you flexibility in future changes, both on the revenue side and the expense side. The cons, you're using $7.1 million of your fund balance management. You're not using it all, but the majority of it. And then also you're changing millage annually. Option 2 is a large increase now. So under this scenario, we would increase millage 16.5%. We wouldn't be using any fund balance management in 2025. The increase to the taxpayer would be $92.35, again, based on a home that's assessed at $222,000. So now you bring in the out years, you have the millage increase of 16.5%. That brings your unassigned fund balance to $38.6 million, which is 119 days. And then you could slowly decrease your fund balance over the next couple of years. And then what we would be talking about in the future, 27 or possibly 28, is maintaining some level of fund balance at over 100 days where we could start breaking even. So doing 2-3% increases annually at that point. Pros and cons. Pros, you're not using your fund balance management. You maintain that money for future emergency needs, one-time projects, or shortfalls in state funding. You're maintaining your fund balance through the projection period. And then it also gives you flexibility on the revenue and expense side in future years. The con, it's a large increase to the taxpayer in 1 year. The third option would be delay changing millage as long as possible. So under this scenario, there will be no millage increase for 2025. We would use $5.1 million of fund balance management. Again, no change to the taxpayer. However, in the out years, your delay doesn't last long. By 2026, we're using the rest of our fund balance management, which is $2.9 million, and we're faced with a 14.5% millage change. And then we would be faced with subsequent millage changes for 27 and also 28. So the delaying option really doesn't delay us very long. And the pros and cons. The pro, there's no millage change for 2025. Cons, it requires a major change in 26. You have minimal flexibility in the future years. You're faced with a millage change for 2026. And we're using all of our fund balance management by 2026. So now we'll have Brandon pull up our interactive spreadsheet. We can walk you through any variations of the scenarios we showed you you'd like to see.
Yeah, Ron, I appreciate that. You sent that to us and, I've played around with this and looked at this from a whole host of sides. So I don't know that that's necessary at this time for me, but if one of my colleagues wants that, more than happy to have us engage in that at this time. Gary?
Oh, I've played with that for quite a while. Yeah.
I think Carrie has one.
So I have one other one to show you, kind of shows the same trend with using small increases annually. It's just another way to look at it because there are endless possibilities with doing that.
Right.
So We'll use 1.3 million of fund balance in 2024. 2.5 million in 2025 with a 4% tax increase. In 2026, we'll use the remainder of our fund balance management with a 7% increase. And then in 27, it would be a 5%, and 28, a 4%. So this is again just another possibility of doing those small annual increases.
And the last thing we wanted to show you is, and it kind of drives home the point of scenario 3 is definitely our least optimal solution. So if we want an increased millage for 2024, what are we faced with now? So I'm gonna have Brandon do a negative 12.5% change for 2024. Now we did a 15% millage increase, but understand that since we increased millage, 12.5% equates to the dollar amount that we're producing.
Right,
So,
because it's already factored in there.
It's already
Okay,
factored in.
thank you.
So if we wouldn't have done the millage increase, we would be faced with using all of our fund balance management in 2024. So that puts us at 99 days. And then in 2025, we would be faced with a 24.5% millage change. So our conversation would be significantly different had we not
Made the adjustment.
For 2024.
Ron, I really appreciate that because it's always hard to look back. And you know, you don't know exactly all of the things that it's hard to, because the budget has so many moving parts. It's always hard to pinpoint exactly what were the items that made such a difference. And I know there were many. But I appreciate that because, you know, one suggestion at that time period was to do nothing. And I felt strongly that that just simply was not an option. So I feel like this certainly plays that out, that it would have been a pretty substantially different conversation that we would be having today had we taken that course. Yes,
I think it's important. The reason that we showed this also was to show that the earlier you make a change, the more flexibility you have in the out years, right? So if the change wouldn't have been made, we would be faced with that big change this year. Well, now we have the opportunity where we could do smaller incremental changes, or we can wait and we can be forced to do a big one. It's that looking at all your options and planning your way through it and deciding how you want to manage it. And the earlier, the more options you have.
I appreciate that. And I've reached out and I think I've isolated where my concerns are in planning for the future for the county. You know, we are looking at different times. We are looking at a structurally deficient budget in the foreseeable future based on funding streams. We're also looking at a budget that now incorporates $2.2 million of debt service that is impactful. I mean, there's no, I think we have our next debt runoff is 2027, if memory serves me correctly.
Right.
So it's we're adding $2.2 million. We've got $3 million additional in capital that has been deferred. So in the next upcoming years, if I've calculated it correctly, the portion of Lawson that has already been committed to that is not being covered by fund balance is about $3.8 million. And the 2.2 in debt. So there's $6 million in a structurally deficient budget that we don't have. And then in the 25, even if we say, okay, well, we have another $3 million in capital that we have to plan for, and the $2 million worth of debt service, you're a $5.2 million deficit in 2025 or 2026. So structurally deficient budget with additional debt being laid into it is going to be a challenge for this county to face. And
it is like turning a tanker. So I feel like that's the position that I'm in at this juncture. I will tell you, I know that there are certain things that will potentially impact our funding in 2026. That is the 911 negotiation. We don't know what's going to happen with that, and I think at this juncture, we're taking the right path in assuming flat funding for the state. As much as it pains me to say that, so I can appreciate that. But I'm certainly not willing to do a large tax increase in this calendar year. I think one of the options was a very significant increase, so that I'm just, people are struggling. I'm not interested in that. So that's a non-starter for me. But I would appreciate hearing from my colleagues as to any questions they may have, or where they are viewing the presentation.
I've compiled a list of questions, Ron, that I sent you. I'd like an opportunity to sit down and go through some more of this stuff. Carrie wants to, I think one or both of you will be able to go through that. You know, these are, I think about these types of statements as they hide as much as they reveal. So there's a number of questions I've identified. I sent you a list, just a short, truncated version of that, but going through it page by page has raised a number of questions that I'm going to have addressed in my identification. So.
I would appreciate the answers to all of those questions that Gary has, as I'm sure Kelly would too. It would be nice to have that information delivered to all three of us, please. Thank you.
I appreciate the transparency. I don't believe that these hide as much as they reveal. I think that you've been very transparent about what the county's facing. And while I think that the budget is complex, and while I think that there are many moving parts, I appreciate that the time and effort that you've taken to distill it to something that can be, understood by folks that are looking through it.
And we've been through some very lengthy monthly updates with you. And I appreciate that very much. And I've asked a lot of questions of you in those meetings, and I appreciate that very much. We watched what unfolded at elections. I mean, we didn't watch it. I mean, I was in the trenches of elections, and as was Kelly, working on things and really looking at, one of the things we do is deliver a fair, accurate, and reliable election. And things changed this year in the way that people vote. And I think about what needs to happen at elections to be able to ever do that again, to be able to provide service to voters in the way that we did this year. Things that is going to, I believe, become an expense. And I know that the state helps us with a lot of things on elections, but it is an expense that we're going to need to handle. I know that the county is projected to be at about 327,000 people in population in the next 20 years. So there's growth every year in that population. And we know that more population brings about a larger need for services. And our revenues in new housing developments are not keeping up with the needs of that population in terms of county services. There's a lot to consider here, a lot to think about, and a lot to think about for the future. And you have been incredibly helpful. Thanks.
This time, then, if that's it, or do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Just in closing, finance is recommending implementing the strategy of small incremental changes, starting with 2025, and we would be recommending a 7% millage increase and using $500,000 on balance management.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We will take that into consideration and look forward to some of the responses and further questions.
before we will be putting the budget on view. I believe the decisions will have to be made at our next finance meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
So we're scheduled to go on view at our next finance meeting.
Okay. Very good. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next up. More difficult decisions for us here. We will take a look at the Cumberland County Library System financial analysis and village tax rate discussion. Carolyn is on the line, I see, and Dana and Stacy have come up.
That's. Brandon, are you logged off?
Let's wait.
Okay, you're all, okay, so that's red. Ready? Yep, that one's ready. Jill, that's okay. Yeah, thank you.
It's on standby for just in case we don't want to spreadsheet.
And Carolyn, are you with us?
I am, yes.
Okay, great.
So we'll go ahead and get started then. I really appreciate Dana and Stacy being there, especially because I can't be there in person to maybe interpret some things for me. So I'm here today to present some information on the financial status of the library system and its member libraries, and talk about a request for an increase to the millage rate, which has not, it's changed twice in 38 years. So we've had increases in twice in 38 years. And I'm just going to ask to go to the next slide, some facts to share with you. And so there we go. So I wanted to share with you first, just to give you sort of some background on this. Despite a millage increase, the second millage increase in history that we had was 2017. We have really been either right on the line or with surpluses or mostly in deficit situations. So prior to 2017, we were in deficit situation, and we had a spike there in 2017, but went right back to that trend. We did, I believe that's in 2021, we had a little bit of a surplus, and a lot of that was because of funds that were part of the COVID influx of funding. And so this is just now for the library system that you're seeing there. And this is just for the library system. This is our revenue and expenses, what we've projected that we will end in 2024 and what we're currently drafting for 2025. This is not a complete budget for 2025, and it has not been adopted by the board yet. But one of the things that you'll see here is very similar to what we were just talking about with the county budget, is that we rely on those fund transfers to fill our deficit. And one thing that happened this year that was kind of nice was we had some remaining Cumberland County recovery funds money for the library system, and so that brought our deficit down by 35,000. So we're projecting a smaller deficit, but still a deficit in 2024. And for 2025, we have just worked so hard to cut any expense that we can, really operating with things that we need to replace, we need to repair, but understanding that the expenses continue to outpace the revenue, and it's, using the fund balances is to address our deficits is a difficult thing, because our deficits are filled with donation money. It's interest income, not really, that gets spent. It's really our donations, and our donations at the library system are few. Again, this is just library system budget here. In our member libraries, we're probably talking about budgets of another $3 to $4 million at the libraries. So are listening to that last presentation, a lot of our struggles are very similar. It's with staff salaries, um, it's with buildings and maintenance, it's with those software subscriptions that are now moved to the cloud. They're licensed annually, and they've become more and more expensive. And so so that's, you know, some of the things that you'd see in a higher level budget. But in 2025, we are projecting that our deficit could be close to $90,000. And that's concerning. So we can go to the next slide. I wanted to share with you in terms of the county funding, what happens with that. So the county tax millage money, toward the bottom of the slide, you see the breakdown of distribution, and that shows you that in 2025, we are getting $4,440,000 in tax revenue at the current millage of 0.166. And that comes in 12 equal payments. What we do with that, and we've done this at least since 2018, the library system keeps 27.5% of that, and then we distribute the rest of it out to our member libraries. And so you can see what that comes to. Excuse me. That 27.5%, we've kept that pretty stable since the libraries lost healthcare. They used to be able to purchase the healthcare benefit from the county, and so we increased the amount to member libraries in that year, and we've kept that stable. We could retain more of that funding at the library system, thus reducing our deficit, but that would then make it more difficult for the libraries to continue to operate, because as you can see in the chart up above, this is how we're in 2025 and moving forward distributing that $3,219,000 in funding out to our libraries. We have a fixed percentage formula, and you can see on the far end what percentage that county funding is for their overall budgets, or as they've predicted them to be for 2025. The former formula it had several elements. Equalization, meaning they all got a little bit of money that was completely the same amount, no matter what size or operations library you were. You got poverty money for more impoverished areas, got a little bit more money in that area. And then there were several incentive categories: programs, library card holders, computer use, local fundraising, how much they actually raise themselves. They get incentivized for that. But the money that we currently receive, it turned into kind of a rich get richer, poor get poorer situation, because those who were getting more money could do more, and therefore their numbers were going up, and it was starting to get a little out of control for our budgets. And so we made a conscious decision to average the last 4 allocations percentage wise and freeze that until we see some other way out, some kind of additional funding. And at the very bottom of the slide is just a reminder that fund restrictions are part of the Pennsylvania Library Code. And so these funds, the county funds, can only be used for support and maintenance of libraries. They can't be used for capital projects, construction expenses, and that sort of thing. We can go on to the next slide. And on here, this just really briefly wanted to share with you, these are overall all locations, including the library system. This just shows you the difference between 2017 and 2013 actual budgets. These were from our audits and our reports to the state that we had. From the last millage increase, our expenses had gone up 17.29%, and are projected in 2025 to be up 29%. And that sets pace right with inflation at 30%. The categories that we use in here, personnel, I think that's pretty clear, but the reason that number has stayed so low, that it's only at a 32.14% increase, is actually because we have unsustainably low staff populations in all of our libraries. We have cut positions, we have eliminated hours. We have not filled positions where we need positions. So that number stays unnaturally low. Collections, that's a required expense. And it does, and part of what's gone up in those at 30.7% is things like fuel surcharges. We now pay an extra 2% on every book that we buy from our major vendor. And that's the best rate that we can get from any vendor. Our databases are in there and they've gone up around 5%. So there's a lot of hidden things in there. The cost of ebooks is another one that's out. It's kind of outrageous what we pay for ebooks, and thank goodness we can get multiple uses out of them, but it's not the same pricing structure for public libraries as it is for home use. Other operating expenses, that's a sort of catch-all. But again, I feel like that number, the 16.53% increase there, is unnaturally low, just because we have cut back on every single thing that we can. And we've inadequately funded things like our software. We've left projects behind, projects that need to be done at our libraries, new roofs and plumbing and HVAC, things like that that need to be done, and they've not been done. People not having adequate cleaning staff. And then fundraising, just a note about fundraising, that's the cost of raising money. And it does not include the staff time involved in raising money. So we're projecting that in 2025, we'll be spending 85.75%, or that will be the increase, I'm sorry, in what we spent on raising, just to raise money. So we can go on to the next slide, and that will help explain some of our revenue situations.
Sorry, Carolyn, technical difficulty.
That's okay.
There we go.
If I could get to it on my screen. So there we go. So county revenue, in the same 7 years that we were talking about earlier, that, from our audited reports, 2017 through 2023, we've seen a 10.2% increase, and that's just at the regular, at the 0.166 millage rate. So no change in millage rate, but because of increases in the number of in the population and the housing, we have luckily seen some increases there, but that's been 10.2%. Our state funding, we did have an increase thanks to some work by Stan Saylor at the state. So we did increase our state funding 28% in that 7-year period. And you can see down at the bottom of the slide that, that's still only meant about an extra $300,000. And the school and municipal support to member libraries, that's up 24.1% since 2017 in that same 7-year period till 2023. But again, it's not a huge amount, but it is something. And so that money is given directly to our libraries. None of that's kept at the library system. So we can move on to the next slide. So significant cost increases this is just to the library system itself, the headquarters office. One of our big expenses that happened was moving to, we had worked to help redo the Rittner Highway space. And we were in there, we moved to Bent Creek Boulevard. It was the best lease rate we could get. And we do not pay utilities there. So when all the utilities increased in 2020 and 2021, we didn't experience that. So that was nice, but still our costs have increased 27.48% between 2017 and 2023. So that same 7-year period, again, we're talking about. I do have a correction to the next set of bullet points. The cost of Microsoft 365, that 33,000 number should be 2025, or I'm sorry, 2024, not 2023. But But we previously, the library system and all the member libraries were on the county's information technology office, supported us with Outlook. We did purchase our own desktop Microsoft, but similar to what they were talking about with the SPITA transactions that we're always looking at subscription-based services and how much they cost. Our costs, we used to buy Microsoft every, I don't know, 8 years or so. And now we have to relicense it every year for each person in packets of 100. So it's, and what they've done, what Microsoft has done is thrown libraries off of the educational pricing, which is what we got in the beginning. So it was $8,000 or so the first year we got it, and went up to about 33,000. So that's a significant expense. But even more importantly, we don't have the staff support just for that project. We have a staff member who supports it, but we're grossly inadequate there, and additional staff support is just currently unaffordable. Cybersecurity risks. Libraries are one of the biggest areas at risk for cybersecurity issues. If you haven't, a quick Google search or ask your librarian, they'll tell you about what happened in Seattle, where they were closed for, over a month. They'll tell you about London, London, Ontario, sorry, and Toronto. They'll tell you about all the places that have had cyber attacks, all the libraries that have cyber attacks, and they have been down for a very long time. And so no services available. We can't even afford insurance anymore. We can't get it. They won't cover us for anything that we could possibly pay for. So we are applying for a $315,000 grant that would take over 3 years, to carry us out over 3 years. Some of the expenses are more than 100,000, so it's not 100,000 a year. We're applying for this grant. We hope we'll get it, but if we don't, we know that our cybersecurity support is insufficient and our risk is very high. Our staff support for that, we don't have the expertise on staff to really deal with these. We do have professionals on retainer, but that's not enough for the day-to-day cybersecurity concerns that we have. Essential software, I mentioned this so many times, and I heard it in the last presentation. The software subscription services that we need for public transactions, for the public to interact, on our website through databases. Most of those go up about 5% annually, and we've had more annual fees than ever. It's, some of it's little things like Adobe and the software that supports our website, program registration and room reservation software. Our vendor just went under, and what I suspect is they weren't charging enough, and it's why we could buy that particular software, because it was cheap. So our databases for newspapers, early education, magazines, tutoring, investments, all these things, they just continue to go up. And then the salary and benefits cost increases. Again, we're just talking about the library system, so I don't feel like I need to reiterate what the finance committee just reported. Our staff fall under the same salary and benefits as the rest of the county. So, so you know what those increases look like. We can go on to the next set of slides. The next 3 slides are all about significant cost increases to our member libraries. And again, their budgets are not our budgets. They do run their own budgets. Once we give them that county tax funding, there's oversight of it, but we don't dictate dollar for dollar what they do with that money. But they have had, one of their biggest expenses has been healthcare benefits. And in fact, for some of them, it's no longer an expense because they can't provide it. So it is difficult to measure the impact, but I have heard from almost, well, now I think I've now heard from every library and they all seem to track the same here. They're unable to, first of all, we're unable to do a group purchasing. That was our first possible solution to this. And it turned out it's not legal when they're all under different EIN numbers. They couldn't do group purchasing. So they're spending their time working with brokers and trying to get coverage for employees. Employers and employees, the libraries and their employees are paying significantly more for a lot less coverage. They have fewer people who are getting health care. And we have at least 2 libraries that are providing, they're just giving their library directors the only person who gets it, and they purchase in the marketplace. One of our member libraries reported that they're paying 171.4% more for coverage, for healthcare coverage for fewer people. So I put a little statistic down at the bottom that shows you in 2017, when we did have the libraries under our healthcare, and we all understand why they can't be, but we were paying a $48,000 subsidy to the libraries. We covered 25% of healthcare costs for 36 people under that big group plan. In 2025, one member library is going to pay $94,182 to cover 5 people, and that's with their employees contributing to that healthcare. So it's clearly one of their biggest expenses and a benefit that they've cut to most employees. We can go, thank you. The next one is talking about significant cost increases in terms of salaries, that our libraries really have insufficient funds to retain staff, and it's costly to replace them and train staff. So this you probably know, we're in the middle of a salary and compensation study, just so we can see where it is that we stand, and maybe, just maybe, work to increase and right size some of these salaries. But our frontline salaries, the people who help you at the circulation desk, for instance, generally start between $11.68 and $12 an hour. They have no benefits and no leave accrual. And just our baseline market research, and more of this will come out in our final report of our study, is that they should be making closer to $14, $15 an hour. Our reference librarians, they're all required to have master's degrees, and they range from $14 to $20 an hour, generally no benefits, and should be somewhere closer to 30. Custodial staff, and I say this where they exist, because so many of our libraries have cut their custodial staff and are just making do, but quite frankly, it's inadequate in terms of maintenance and cleaning. They're paying that $11.58 to $12 an hour. And library directors generally start, and these are master degrees, like degreed librarians with financial background, with nonprofit management background. I mean, they're highly skilled individuals, and they're being hired between 50 and 68,000 with benefits, but we know that should be closer to the $80,000 or $90,000 range. So we can go on to the next one, and this is just another brief summary of additional cost increases that we see in member libraries. And I don't think there are any big surprises here. Aging infrastructure, building maintenance and repair is a huge one. Replacement of HVAC systems, replacements of roofs, taking care of water and sewer systems, replacing desks and shelves and things that have been used for far too long and put together with duct tape to keep them together. Insurances have gone up significantly. Utilities went up significantly. I already talked about library materials in another slide, because that is something that we spend good at least 12 to 14% of our budget on. The costs of audits have become so exorbitant that there are some libraries that are unable to find an auditor, and that is a legal requirement for our libraries to get those audits. through the Pennsylvania Library Code. So, so that's a real concern for us. And of course, the costs of technology. One of the, well, I don't need to go into specifics about technology, but the costs of technology to our libraries are just starting to soar. So the next slide just gives you a little bit of by 2023 by the numbers. We always pull these kinds of figures for our state annual reports and for our missioned measures for the county, but some of these are in there and some are not. But anyway, I just wanted to put this up here just to start that conversation about the value of our public libraries to the community as gathering spaces, as people to help other people navigate information, early literacy programs, financial literacy programs, social engagement, and resources like books, movies, music, equipment, tax forms and other forms, and help filling out those forms. Food, that we have libraries hand out food for the summer learning program, and feed lunch, computers, access to computers and Wi-Fi. These are all the sorts of things that base library services. These aren't even enhanced library services. And so the last slide is just about the request. And
Carolyn.
yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned yesterday when you met with us that I think is better served to talk about now than after you go to the next slide was some of the information you're still in the process of gathering from the member libraries, specifically relation to hours, the number of hours that have been cut to get a better idea, as well as staff positions. Yeah. So that is still being gathered, correct?
It is, and I did have trying to think where I put that little, I had a little note to self about the hours changes, because our hours changes have been pretty significant even already, and they will just continue if the libraries are not funded, not if they don't get their additional funds. Well, I may have to do this off the top of my head. Oh, no, that's a staffing. I found one of my notes on staffing. Wow. I don't know where I put that little note. But our staffing, let me just I have it in a note here.
I'm gonna interrupt Carolyn for a second, because Carolyn, I so appreciate what you're doing today. I want to make sure that everyone knows that Carolyn yesterday spent time at the Bureau of Elections assisting with an election. And so I know that the rest of us are tired today. And I've done a lot, Carolyn, so I don't, it's okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, with the hours, I just, this is off the top of my head as I try to pull this up. I know that we've cut at least, there we go. There's the information I need. There we go. Amelia Given alone, they cut 6 hours, which was 12% of their open hours to the public. Bosler Library has cut 3 hours and is looking at 3 additional hours. So they're going to be down an additional, they're going to be down a total of 6 hours. So that's a 9% increase. And if there's no change, they're likely to need to drop another 4 to 10 hours a week later in the year. Not every library was quite as specific. I don't know that every library wants to reveal that information, but everybody is talking about where they could make cuts to their hours. And the concern with cutting hours, oh, there we go. There's another, and again, this one said, please don't mention us by name, but could cut up to 20 hours a week from one library, and another one said up to 24 hours in a week. So so these are just some of the things that we're looking at from our member libraries, is that they are required by the state to stay open a certain number of hours in order to get state funding. So if they can't do that, then we risk losing that funding as well. But it's not just the savings of not being open. It's also they can't afford the staff to run the library. So, so yeah, some libraries cutting, like I said, up to, if I read that correctly, could be up to 16 hours at one library. It could be up to 24 hours at another library, every week, that we couldn't serve the public. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because our existence is, it's all about being open and available to the public. So,
Carolyn, I have a question. You mentioned about the hours that are required.
Yeah.
Qualified aid. Can you give us some idea what that hour requirement is, or what that system looks like? Or if you can get that for us.
I can get it for you. Yeah, I can get that for you for sure. Let me write that down. Yeah, I'm not sure where I'd find that right off the top of my head. But
Carolyn, I mentioned it, not that I wanted you to dig for all of those details, but I for one appreciate that you did. But it was really just as a reminder of what we talked about yesterday, that you would be getting that information to the board.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely summarize some of that information. I think here we go, 45 hours a week, and 7 hours have to be on the weekend. That's the minimum requirement.
What that reminds me of.
It's 45 hours a week and 7 hours on the weekend.
You have so many seconds to answer the 911 call. If you don't answer the 911 call in that set number of seconds, you lose your state funding. We've got the same issue, right? Just on level of.
Ready for me to move to the next slide?
I am, yeah. So, our request, what we're really looking at, and we have looked at so many different scenarios. Our real request is for, a minimum millage increase of 0.291. But we believe if that's unobtainable, we could get by at 0.249. We didn't do nearly the number of scenarios, or at least written out as well as the county finance did, but that's the same sort of thing we played with, was what could we work with? What do libraries need? And what does that mean in dollars to them if we ran it through? And so we ran these numbers through the formula, and would that be enough? And what would they do with that? And it would be far too much to share every single library's breakdowns, but there was a real theme to all these things. The first one was adjusting wages based on market values, and making sure that we're paying, we're nonprofits. We're not looking to be for-profit salaries, but adjusting wages, restoring and adopting staff positions where positions are needed. A lot of libraries have used attrition to get rid of staff positions. And it's been things like teen and adult programmers, financial staff, circulation managers, community events coordinators, reference staff, janitorial. It's all over the board that staff shared this with me. But one library got rid of 3 positions and is slated to cut 2 additional part-time positions. One library reported that they cut 19 full-time equivalent hours. So that was 44% of their staff hours. 166 hours of staff time. Another library said 7 full-time equivalent positions. And like I said, they cut their finance manager, and they're outsourcing their finance to basically a bookkeeping service. So they don't have the skilled financial help that they really need. And so those are 2 really big areas, but also completing delayed maintenance repairs, projects that libraries have put off for far too long. Upgrading and replacing technology, security systems is huge. telephone systems. We've, been trying to move to VoIP, and that's a challenge based on the way our network is. So bringing reduced costs, but also changing them out is just, it's costly. Expanding collections available for lending. We see lots of new and interesting things that the public have indicated through our surveys, that services that they want, things they want to be able to borrow from libraries. So we want to expand those. Increased programming both in the library and outreach, going out into the community and providing programming. But that and the next one both require staff. And when we're cutting our staff, we can't be sending them out to do those sorts of things. And when we look at library calendars and the programming, it's been cut so significantly because of lack of staff. And then lastly, having the adequate staff to expand community partnerships. One of the things we've worked hard through several of our conditional grants is to work directly with the community, and we've really had to stop some of that. Somebody gave a really good story of how we'll build a partnership, and the partnership will say, well, we want to contribute, but we don't have people and money. And we say, well, we don't have people and money. So then nothing can happen. And we think we could do a lot of good in the county if we had the staff to say, yes, we can bring our staff in, and here's what we can contribute to this community partnership. We've stalled so many programs because of inadequate staffing. So like I said, this at a 0.291%, we think we could do a lot. At a 0.249%, I'm sorry, I said percent. I'm talking about a millage increase here. At a 0.249 millage increase, we think we could get by. We could keep our libraries open. We wouldn't need to do those cuts in staffing and hours, that we're anticipating. So I think now that's everything I have in terms of slide information. I don't know if there are additional questions or if you've been asking as we've gone along.
Are there any questions of Carolyn at this time? I was not here, of course, in 2018, but the healthcare benefits cuts. So you used to be on county healthcare.
Yeah, so the library system staff still are. We are county staff members. The member libraries, and I don't know the intricacies of this, but they were able to buy into the county healthcare system. So they wasn't paid for by the county. They had to reimburse, but the library system paid, I believe, 25%. We gave a subsidy to the libraries for anyone they wanted to put on it. And then with their own boards, they worked out who was eligible, who they would pay for, and how much they would pay. So some paid 25%, some paid 50%, some paid 100% of the remaining balance. When the county went to self-funded healthcare, there's just no way you can work that. You can't take that risk to have these non-county employees on the healthcare benefit. And so it makes sense why it can't be done, but it became, I spent most of my time in my first year learning all about healthcare and how healthcare systems work and how to work with brokers. And we thought we could maybe get one big plan for all the people. And it turned out that was not a legal option for us. So each library had to go on their own. And as I mentioned, 2 libraries, definitely their directors are the only people covered, and they go on the marketplace. And they get a subsidy from their library for that. And the other libraries have really cut down. Like I said, there were 36. I don't have an exact number how many are covered now, but I would say it's probably about half that.
Thanks, Carolyn. I appreciate it.
Carolyn, can you remind me What were the reasons for the decoupling of the library system from the county's IT system?
Was stocked out.
Yeah, I think again, that was similar to the healthcare situation, that the county wouldn't, I don't know the really the thinking behind it, but couldn't cover Microsoft in terms of security and in terms of management of it. They couldn't cover Microsoft licensing for all all library system employees. We have about 300 Microsoft 365 accounts. Well, that's how many we purchase. We've just slightly under that. And so that would then fall under IMTO to manage those, manage the security, etc. And so what we did was when we moved off ccpa.net, we moved onto our own domain. We purchased our own Microsoft. I mean, we did that because we were told this is what is happening. We're moving to Microsoft 365. You can't be on it. I think we would have had an option for the county library system. In fact, I know we had an option for county library system employees to stay on it, but that would then that would separate us from the library. So our only other option was to tell each library, you each have to manage your own system. And of course, the efficiencies that come with Microsoft 365 make it a good business tool for us to have as a shared tenant. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine. Just one other question. I've marked this up with a lot of notes, and some of them are from the brainstorming session we all had, which, thanks to everybody who came in and presented, because I think we spent about 2.5 hours with a lot of ideas. The problem is, to make yourself more relevant to audiences, you have to have people to do the programs. And if you're making that production, then you're going the opposite direction, obviously. So that's, real for you folks. So, but this, we got this about 40 minutes before, and I'm not saying this to put you on the spot, because again, I think we're all very appreciative of what you did with the help on election day. But we got this about 40 minutes before this meeting, and with a whole host of other things. And I just haven't had time to tease out all the questions that are in this. Kind of in a time crunch. And so let me ask this question. So the library system board, how long has this topic been under discussion of needing a village? Because, we only became aware of this a month ago.
Well, we've been talking about it for a little over a year. It has come up in directors' meetings. I would say even prior, I was hearing things from directors that, we need to start thinking about a millage increase maybe as early as 2019, which one of my concerns was it's too soon. We just got one in 2017. And also, we don't know what the future holds with state funding. I did talk about it when I did my orientation with all of you. In fact, I think Kelly specifically asked, she said, I hear some buzz about the possibility of a millage increase. And so I did at the commissioner's orientation, I brought it up there. But, we've been trying not to have to ask, but also asking a lot of questions of Dana and Carrie at the finance office, just to gather data and try and figure out, what would this look like? How do we go about this? Stacy's also been, helping me to frame things if we were to ask. But yes, it's been something that our board was aware of, and our directors have been working very hard on looking at it from all angles. But it has been, something that I'd say July and August is when in earnest we said, we have to do this. We have to ask.
Last question. So when you folks do your strategic planning on a periodic basis,
Every 5 years, yes.
Okay. Has there ever been any freewheeling discussion about maybe changing the manner in which, instead of us being a decentralized federated system, is that what I'm looking at here with a number of the things you outlined? It almost seems as if that's a system that just is designed to fail under current situation. So has there ever been any discussion, and are there other counties with multiple branches that are structured differently with maybe more of a centralized employee base, centralized, management, decision making?
So, so 35 counties, they aren't all consolidated systems. I shouldn't say it that way. There are 35 counties that are not federated library systems. Many of those, our nearest neighbor, Perry County, they just don't have a system. So we have many counties in Pennsylvania with no system. We have several counties like Philadelphia and Dauphin County that are consolidated, although Dauphin has 2 libraries that are not part of their county system. And then we have 32 counties in Pennsylvania that operate as federated library systems. So it is actually the recommended method for operating libraries in Pennsylvania by the Office of Commonwealth Libraries. They think there's, they not only think, they've proven that there's a lot of strength in operating as a federated system, that we especially in a system like ours where our key services and our policies and things like that, they're all consolidated. We share one policy manual, we share one circulation system, all of our software is the same. We try to keep our public services as consistent as possible, so that people have a similar experience all around the county. And it also helps us then to manage those funds. For instance, our fund development, I mentioned how much the cost of fundraising has gone up. We have a single software for fund development. Everybody doesn't have to go out and buy their own. Same thing with the circulation system. Same thing with our computers. We purchase all the computers for the libraries. We maintain them for the libraries. So we do a lot of things in consolidation, but the libraries do have some autonomy. And that is actually a recommended model for operating libraries in a Commonwealth.
So you do look at that periodically. That's good to know.
We do, yeah.
One last question. Since you
Yeah.
mentioned about the fundraising, and I noticed the asterisk, because this doesn't include any of the personnel costs. So what exactly does that cover?
So that covers the software that we use, and which our software is about 16,000. And then that covers all the cost to carry out an event, a fundraising event. So whether it's invitations that are sent, or operating a facility to hold something, or Frederickson's blueberry sales are always a great example. They have to buy those blueberries to sell those blueberries. So it includes those kinds of costs.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? I don't know. Anything from the folks in the room, or Carolyn? Dana, did you have anything that you were interested in adding?
Did you want to see any of the different scenarios of the library tax and the county tax together, or are you okay?
I think that we need to think through a lot of what's been presented here today.
I'm gonna wanna see some scenarios. I just don't know what it is right now.
Yeah, on the sample that you've sent around, the little, I don't believe it was on there. I'm sorry, I meant on the little tool that we can manipulate and have been playing with. We don't have that included. The library millage is not included in their rate, in their tax.
I have a different one. It's just a simple spreadsheet where there's one column where you can put changes in. We'll forward that to you.
Thank you.
The column that's highlighted in yellow is the only one you can change.
Okay.
But it will show you if making numbers up, if you do a 7% county and a 50% library, this is the total impact to the taxpayer.
And all of those calculations are done based on that $222,000.
Yes.
Just if that's not clear, thank you, please. Yeah, that would be good for us to look at that. We can take a look. So I believe if that's it, if there are no other questions or nothing else to come forward, is there any other business to come before the board at this time? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Carolyn.